On Monday afternoon, I said this: I understand the very real public interest in the issues that will be ventilated by the evidence. I also recognise the freedom that permits what is said to be discussed and the subject of comment in whatever way is thought fit, and I shall be interested in how it is covered. For my part, I shall approach the relationship between the press and politicians from an entirely non-partisan judicial perspective, which I have no doubt is the reason that I was given this remit. I would hope that this approach will be made clear. When I said those words, I had in mind some of the evidence that I anticipated we would hear, including that which we did in fact hear yesterday. In the light of the reaction and considerable commentary last night and this morning, it's appropriate for me to say a little more. This necessarily involves explaining something of the judicial process. I understand entirely the reason for some of the reaction to the evidence yesterday, and in particular to the emails about which Mr. Murdoch was asked. But I am acutely aware, from considerable experience, that documents such as these cannot always be taken at face value and can frequently bear more than one interpretation. I am absolutely not taking sides or expressing any opinion, but I am prepared to say that it is very important to hear every side of the story before drawing conclusions. In due course, we will hear all the relevant evidence from all the relevant witnesses, and when I report, I will then make the findings that are necessary for me to fulfil the terms of reference that the Prime Minister set for me. In the meantime, although I have seen requests for other inquiries and other investigations, it seems to me that the better course is to allow this inquiry to proceed. When it is concluded, there will doubtless be opportunities for consideration to be given to any further investigation that is then considered necessary.
So the witness today is Mr. Rupert Murdoch, please.
Thank you. I'm very conscious that the material which Mr. Murdoch has provided has come in different tranches, and having regard to the experience that we've seen with some witnesses, I think it would be very helpful if you're moving from bundle to bundle, if somebody could help him do that.
Could you take the book in your waist hand and read from the card?
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Your full name, please, Mr. Murdoch.
Keith Rupert Murdoch.
Now, in front of you, I believe you'll see a witness statement you signed and dated the 12th of April of this year with 44 exhibits. There's a declaration of truth on it. Are you content that the inquiry receives your statement as your formal testimony?
I am.
Mr. Murdoch, as I've said to a number of other witnesses, indeed to many other witnesses, I'm very grateful for the obvious care that you have taken in the preparation of your evidence and the material that you've placed before the inquiry, and I wanted to record that.
Thank you, sir.
Now, you are the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of News Corporation, a company incorporated in the United States,
Yes.
with total assets of $60 billion and a total annual revenue of $34 billion. Is that right, Mr. Murdoch?
Yeah, approximately, yes.
Now, for our purposes, if we can be more parochial, approximately 8% of News Corp's revenues are generated in the United Kingdom, 60% by News International. Is that right?
That is right.
Now, anyone who wants greater detail may look at your witness statement when it's published in due course. Would it be fair to say that you have been following British politics for at least 60 years, Mr. Murdoch?
Yes, I suppose so. With a varying intensity.
You say that you welcome this inquiry. It follows then that rumours that you have not forgiven Mr. Cameron for setting it up are untrue. Is that right?
Did I say that?
No,
My witness statement?
You have said in your witness statement you welcome this inquiry.
Yes.
I'm putting to you rumours which you would say are presumably untrue, that you haven't forgiven him for setting up this inquiry. Are those rumours untrue?
Untrue.
Why do you say there's a need for this inquiry, Mr. Murdoch?
Well, I think the need is fairly obvious. There have been some abuses shown. I would say there are many other abuses, but we can all go into that in time. And, you know, the state of media in this country is of absolutely vital interest to all its citizens. So I think, you know, in a chance, and frankly, I welcomed the opportunity because I wanted to put certain myths to bed.
Yes. You use the term abuses. Is it your perception or understanding that abuses go further than the issue of phone hacking, or are they limited to the issue of phone hacking?
Oh, they go further.
Okay. Well, we'll come back to that in due course. May I ask you about your business philosophy, which you cover in your statement, and can I see if we can crystallise out of what you say three main points. First, you have an intuitive instinct for acquiring businesses which you believe will be successful. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly, you have a long-term perspective. And thirdly, you have a deep flair for and understanding of the possibilities of technology. Now, Mr. Murdoch, have I got that right?
Can I make very slight amendments?
Certainly.
But, I would say that all my interests, whether intuitive or otherwise, have been confined to the media, not just any business. Long term, I think you're absolutely right. I have, I think just about everything I've done in terms of major moves by the company, particularly one we're doing at the moment, is very long term in view. And, you know, sometimes I've been right, and sometimes I've been wrong. It's at great cost.
I'll ask you briefly about your political philosophy. Would it be fair to say that you always have been a great admirer of Baroness Thatcher and what she stands for?
Yes, I was. I became that after she was elected. And I remain a great admirer.
Well, the Sun supported her in the 1979 election, so presumably your support for Mrs. Thatcher crystallised in your mind before that election. Would that be right?
Well, I think all newspapers were much the same. We'd just come through the most terrible winter of discontent, strikes, disruptions to the whole society, and I think we all wanted change.
Can I put one quote to you? It's indeed from you. An interview by Mr. William Shawcross in Time magazine, 25th October 1999. We needn't turn it up. And this is you speaking. What does libertarian mean? As much individual responsibility as possible, as little government as possible, as few rules as possible. But I'm not saying it should be taken to the absolute limit. So is the gist of that few rules but not no rules?
Oh, clearly there are necessary rules in a working society, but they can be overdone.
Now, some recent tweets of yours betray a hostile approach to right-wingers and toffs. Who are you referring to?
I was rather low. You don't take my tweets too seriously. I think I was really saying that the extremists on both sides were piling in on me.
Now, you referred to myths about you, Mr. Murdoch. Is it your feeling that there is a lot of mythology around and about you which really needs to be debunked?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we'll see how we get on over the course of today. Can I say what the plan is? We're going to focus on the political issues first, and the approach will be, broadly speaking, chronological, otherwise we'll lose track of where we are. Then I will go to the issue of phone hacking, and then we'll look at some broader questions. Are you content with that?
Yes, indeed.
Thank you. Now, the acquisition of the Times and Sunday Times, which is a separate vignette in the case, but which I do need to cover, and your witness statement addresses, that you bid for those papers and 5 lesser titles at the end of 1980, didn't you, Mr. Murdoch?
Yes, I thought there were 3 lesser titles, but perhaps I've forgotten.
Okay, well, we won't argue about how many. And at that stage, you having acquired the News of the World in 68 and the Sun in 69, you had slightly over 30% of the UK newspaper market. Is that correct?
Well, the Sun must have been a more sudden success than I thought, in memory, to have reached 30% within 10 years, but I'll take your figure.
Okay. Now, the deadline for the purchase, if it was going to take place, was March 1981, and by way of background, the Secretary of State for Trade and Industry, Mr. John Biffin, was obliged by statute to refer the case to the Monopolies and Mergers Commission unless, in his opinion, each title was not economic as a going concern and the case was one of urgency. That's the background position on the law. Can I invite you, please, now to look at...
I think we've put in exhibits
yes,
to prove that he said that.
Well,
and indeed that Thompson's...
The Fair Trading Act says that. It's whether the Times and the Sunday Times were not economic as going concerns, which may be an issue. But can we look, please, at a document evidencing a lunch at Chequers with Baroness Thatcher on the 4th of January 1981. It's your exhibit KRM 14, which may well be tab 15 in that bundle. Yes. And you'll see that Mr. Ingham, who was Mrs. Thatcher's press secretary, noted this on the 5th of January 81. It's our number 01626, addressed to the Prime Minister. Attached is a record of the salient points of your lunch yesterday with Rupert Murdoch. In line with your wishes, the attached has not gone outside number 10 and is, of course, to be treated commercial in confidence. Now, this is a document which didn't enter the public domain until March of this year, Mr. Murdoch. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Now, according to the history of the Times, the Murdoch years, published by HarperCollins in 2005, page 28, you previously had no recollection whatsoever of this lunch. Is that right?
That's correct, and I still don't, to be honest. But I totally accept Mr. Ingham's minutes, detailed minutes, which sound to me to be correct.
Well, it was quite...
I think I'd asked Mrs. Thatcher, could I see her? And she said, well, why don't you come to lunch on Sunday?
Yes. Well, according to Mr. Ingham's note, this is our page 01627.
Yes.
It was quite an intimate occasion. If one looks at the few numbers of people there was obviously the Prime Minister, Mr. Thatcher, Mr. Ingham, and you, and the meeting was at your request. Do you see that?
Yes.
So I hope you don't mind if I tease you about this, that when you told the Select Committee on the 19th of July of last year that you wished politicians would leave you alone, you weren't, of course, referring to this meeting, were you? Now, what we see...
I think this meeting was to inform the chief executive of the company of the likelihood of a change of ownership of a great iconic asset. I thought it was quite appropriate.
Well, of course, Mrs. Thatcher knew that that was probable, or well, I suppose one outcome was that Lord Thompson might have closed these two great titles if she couldn't sell them. But there seems to be two purposes behind the lunch. One was to brief Mrs. Thatcher or give her your thoughts about what is described here as the embryonic and developing Reagan administration. Do you see that in paragraph 2?
Yes, I think it shows that at least the conversation for some time was taken up by me gossiping about Australian and American politics.
Yes. And the three of you, if I can put it in this way, President-elect Reagan, Baroness Thatcher and you were all, of course, on the same page politically, weren't you?
I guess that's fair. Yes, this was just before his inauguration.
Indeed it was. Is it part of the purpose of this meeting, if one can talk almost psychologically, to demonstrate to Mrs. Thatcher how very much you were, quotes, one of us? And one of us is Baroness Thatcher's term. Or was that part of your purpose?
No.
Of course, you appreciated the importance of a face-to-face meeting. That's why you requested it. Is that right?
Yes.
And as Mr. Ingham says, if you look at...
The purpose was not to tell her about Mr. Reagan.
Pardon me, Mr. Murdoch?
The purpose was not to tell her about President Reagan.
She knew all of this anyway.
Yes.
Paragraph 4, the main purpose of Mr. Murdoch's visit was to brief the Prime Minister on his bid, that's your bid for Times newspapers, and then you explained to her what your bid amounted to in financial terms, and then you treated her to some speculations about who else had bid. Is that fair?
Yes, that was pure speculation. I don't think Thompson told me of anyone. Some had announced bids, like Captain Maxwell, who was always bidding for things.
Why was it important to you that Mrs. Thatcher understand the nature and quality of your bid?
Well, as I said, this was the movement of a great institution, which is under threat of closure. And I thought it was perfectly right that she should know what was at stake.
Well, she knew that anyway, Mr. Murdoch. What you were seeking to demonstrate
No, I don't think she did know that there'd be great problems with the unions, or there could be the sort of extent of the costs and the risks.
But
I'm not sure she was interested.
Were you seeking to demonstrate to her that you were the right man to acquire these great papers, because you had the qualities and charisma to take the papers forward, and equally importantly, you had the will to crush the unions?
No, I didn't have the will to crush the unions. I might have had the desire, but that took several years.
Well, if we substitute desire for will, are we in agreement?
Yes, I don't think it was opposite to this meeting particularly, but yes, we could get into the whole question of Wapping later.
Yes. If you look at paragraph 10, Mr. Murdoch, 01629, you explained to Mrs. Thatcher that some 50 million of the news group's resources could be at risk, and that such an amount, quotes, could finish us. Do you remember saying that?
I don't remember saying that, but I probably did. It was a gross underestimate.
And you talked about the financial position of the Times, but you didn't mention, did you, the financial position of the Sunday Times?
I said Times newspapers.
So you meant both, pardon me. Was it your view that the Sunday Times was not economic as a going concern?
I didn't know. I thought that it certainly had a great position on Sunday, but its economics and its staff and everything were all intertwined together with the Times, which resulted in a big net loss.
If you look at the Sunday Times separately, S.G. Warburg had advised, and as you knew, that in 1982 and onwards the paper would make a profit. You knew that, didn't you?
I didn't see that, Warburg. I don't remember seeing it. But did it contribute a profit to the pool of Times newspapers? Yes.
Okay. And finally on this note, paragraph 12, page 01630, the Prime Minister thanked Mr. Murdoch for keeping her posted on his operations. She did no more than wish him well in his bid, noting the need for much improved arrangements in Fleet Street affecting manning and the introduction of new technology. So you would wish to point out that no express favours were offered to you by Mrs. Thatcher, is that right?
And none asked. I think if I'd asked for anything, Mr. Ingham's very full note certainly would have recorded that.
But you wouldn't have been so undeft and cack-handed to have asked directly, would you, Mr. Murdoch?
I hope not. I've never asked a Prime Minister for anything.
But it operates at a far more sophisticated level, doesn't it? You see her, you seek to demonstrate to her, you probably knew it anyway, that you were precisely on the same page politically as her, that you were one of us. And the understanding was that to the extent to which she might help
newspapers together.
Well, commercially that would be right, but legally, of course, one had to look at them separately, wouldn't you?
No, it was one company, I believe.
Well, Mr. Biffin made it clear to Parliament that he was looking at each of them separately. I mean, that's clear from the left-hand column on page 01602, although it's not necessary to turn it up. But I can see your position, that whatever the legal analysis, you would look at them as one unit, is that right?
Yes, newspapers together.
Well, commercially that would be right, but legally, of course, one had to look at them separately, wouldn't you?
No, it was one company, I believe.
Well, Mr. Biffin made it clear to Parliament that he was looking at each of them separately. I mean, that's clear from the left-hand column on page 01602, although it's not necessary to turn it up. But I can see your position, that whatever the legal analysis, you would look at them as one unit, is that right?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Aitken in the debate said something about you, which I think I should put. It's, if you look at page 01606, on the right-hand side, are you with me, Mr. Murdoch?
Excuse me, Mr. J. 1606.
Yes, 01606.
I have it.
On the right-hand side, he said this, right in the middle of the page, of the right-hand column. He says, that is no isolated example. One could give numerous examples of resignations by reporters of the Australian Press Council upholding allegations of bias by Murdoch papers in their political reporting, and of Mr. Murdoch openly pushing his commercial interests by using his newspaper powers. I read the Australian papers every day for the best part, I read the Australian papers every day for the best part of 3 years. when I was writing a book on Australia.
I'm sorry, Mr. J. This is 1606?
01606.
Who'll be quoting? Mr. Aitken?
Mr. Aitken.
Oh, well.
But he said he was profoundly unhappy. But was he accurate, at least as regards the facts he states here?
Certainly not.
So there weren't resignations of reporters, were there?
Oh, no, we certainly had some upheaval because in 1975, I believe, the Queen, through the Governor-General, dismissed the Australian government. And we took the attitude in the Australian newspaper, very strongly and legally, that he was within his rights. And that caused a lot of upset. The more radical journalists thought it was outrageous that the Queen or the Governor-General should do that. Whereas in fact, I won't go into all the rights and wrongs, the government had lost its majority in the Senate and couldn't get supply through, so had no money to operate.
What about the Australian Press Council upholding allegations of bias by Murdoch papers in their political reporting? Was that at least factually right?
No.
And of you openly pushing your commercial interests by using your newspaper powers? Was that right?
No. I take a particularly strong pride in the fact that we've never pushed our commercial interests in our newspapers.
Some points arising out of Sir Howard Evans's book, Good Times, Bad Times. The extent to which you need to look at the page, we can provide you with the relevant extracts. The bundle we've got, it is tab 5. His analysis of you at Little Roman 17. This is the preface to the July 2011 edition, which was written very shortly after the Select Committee attendance on the 19th of July. The last paragraph. How much Rupert Murdoch knew, that's a...
I'm sorry.
Are you at Little Roman 17? Can you just give me
the context of that again? This is from Mr. Evans's book.
Yes.
But you then switched to the Select Committee?
Now, I'm just saying, Mr. Murdoch, he wrote this preface very shortly after the 19th of July last year, which is when you gave evidence to the Select Committee. Do you follow me?
No, that I wrote what from Mr. Evans's book?
No. This is Sir Howard Evans writing an updated preface, if you like, to his book. Which is reflecting.
I had not read the book.
This is his contemporary reflections, if you like, on what happened before the Select Committee. But he's speaking about phone hacking, and he's saying how much Rupert Murdoch knew and when he knew it may not be pinned down because he exercises what the sociologist Max Weber defined as charismatic authority, where policy derives from how the leader is perceived by others rather than by instructions or traditions. Do you feel he's got a point there?
No, I was going to say when you laid out my 3 principles of government, I was meant to add that we have a very large company, and I do run that company with a great deal of decentralization.
But I
don't think I have any aura.
But this issue of aura, of charisma, it's Sir Howard Evans's view. You know it's Mr. Andrew Neil's view. It's the Sun King analogy, page 214 of Full Disclosure. Indeed, a lot of people have come up with this same...
There's 2 you've just mentioned.
Okay, we've got 2 so far, but we'll find some more as we proceed. But it's a common theme. Do you think it has any validity at all as to... It may not be a bad thing at all. It may be part of your success, that this is how you operate. But do you feel it's right or wrong?
I do try very hard to set an example of ethical behaviour and make it quite clear that I expect it. And one could describe that in a number of ways. But do I do it via an aura or charisma, I don't think so.
Okay.
Can we try it this way, Mr. Murdoch? That you have been on the stage, on the world stage of the press for many, many years. You have seen many editors come and go. Your press interests have extended. It wouldn't be at all surprising, would it, if those who worked for you recognised that you had an appreciation of events, that it would be important for them to understand, and that they should therefore take a different line, only with caution, because of their respect for your views?
Well, I would hope so. I think that we have not had that many. Our editors have generally been very long-serving. I invite you to have all the living ones up here.
I wasn't seeking to suggest you'd had a big turnover. I was seeking to suggest that in 40 years, or 50 years, over the many, many papers that you've been responsible for and that you've owned, you have seen many, many editors.
Yes.
Now, page 144 of Sir Howard Evans's book, where he's quoting from the Thomson-Warburg assessment of your bid. The pros and cons of the 7 finalists, as they were described, are set out. But your qualities are set out, but reservations...
Page 17?
Page 144.
Oh. It's actually the next page. No. Your fingers are on it now. It's that page.
This page. Thank you.
In the smaller print, paragraph 1, reservations.
I'm sorry, mine are on both sides, yours aren't.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
I'm working from the book itself. Reservations. Mr. Murdoch's arrival in England has had some deteriorating effect on the standards of the daily tabloid press. Do you feel that that's a fair observation?
No, absolutely not.
Well, without attributing cause and effect, do you think that between 1968 and 1981 the standards of the tabloid press had deteriorated?
No.
So this is completely wrong, is it?
Well, it's a matter of opinion, but I think it's wrong.
Do you think the standards had improved?
Yes, I think we expanded to a new young public. I felt the opportunity for the Sun was to go against the Mirror, whose leader had said he wanted to get rid of the elves, which is sort of putting down his working class readership. And we thought there was a real opportunity here.
We're looking at standards here. I mean, is it your view, Mr. Murdoch, that the standards of the tabloid press, if one were to take the period 1968 to date, have steadily improved?
Well, I think the Sun has never been a better paper than it is today. I couldn't say the same for my competitors, but we won't go into that.
The other reservation expressed here, he undoubtedly has been deeply and often involved in the editorial function. Of course, we're looking here at the period 1968 to 1981. We're not looking at recent history. But would that be a fair observation?
Well, 1968, when I came here, I didn't really have enough to do with the news of the world. That was my fault. The Sun, the starting of the Sun, again, but gradually, yes. And then in 1974, or I think it was the end of 73, we were all of us, carried away by the success of the Sun. We said, let's try in America, where we did very badly. But we certainly took our eye off the sun. So it was not a continuous thing throughout that period.
But surely your main objective was to...
I've even forgotten who well, I think it was basically Mr. Larry Lamb, or Sir Larry Lamb, who was editor through that period. And he was a very, very brilliant journalist.
Wasn't it your main objective, Mr. Murdoch, to improve the commercial appeal of these papers, the Sun and the News of the World, and you weren't really concerned with the ethical side of its product? Would that be a fair observation?
No. It was always to tell the truth, certainly to interest the public, to get their attention, but always to tell the truth.
So the touchstones are truthfulness and write that which is interesting to the public. Is that it?
Yes, I have great respect for the British public, and I try to carry that through and giving them what...
So the public, or put another way, the market, they're the best arbiters of what should be in and outside newspapers. Is that fair?
Yes, I think so, absolutely.
Okay. Now, I'm sure Sir Howard Evans would want me, if he were metaphorically standing behind me, to put many points arising out of this book, but there just isn't time. But there's one point I should put, because it's relevant to the terms of reference. Just bear with me, Mr. Murdoch.
I'm afraid.
It's page 534.
I've never read the book, I'm sorry.
If you look at the last 6 lines,
Yes.
he says this, that in my year as editor of the Times, Murdoch broke all these guarantees. He put his point of view very simply to the home editor of the Times, Fred Emery, when he summoned him from holiday on 4th March to his office shortly before asking for my resignation. So this is the 4th of March 1983. And you apparently said this, I give instructions to my editors all around the world, why shouldn't I in London? Do you remember saying that?
No, I don't. I do remember meeting Mr. Emery, and I don't know what he told Mr. Evans, but I know what he told me, which was, you're facing an insurrection in the staff against Mr. Evans.
So the anonymous editor, in terms of your witness statement, because you don't identify him, when you say you had to, in effect...
Oh, he was talking about Mr. Evans.
Pardon me?
He was saying, you're facing an insurrection
Yes.
on the Times.
Sorry,
a staff insurrection.
Yes. Now, Mr. Murdoch, in your witness statement, you don't identify the editor, but you refer to an anonymous editor who had to be let go because there was, in effect, a staff insurrection. Were you intending to refer to Sir Howard Evans?
I was indeed.
Okay.
I'm sorry for that omission.
It's not an omission, it's just that you didn't give his name in the witness statement for fear perhaps of...
He was the only editor of the Times that we've ever asked to leave.
Was that really the reason, though, for as it were, getting rid of him? He had, after all, been a brilliantly successful editor of the Sunday Times for over a decade, hadn't he? And had shown his worth.
Yes, I would say so. He had great assistants who he didn't get on with, I think, Mr. Bruce Page, who ran the Insight team and did all the great work on thalidomide and so on, but never really got the credit for it. But never mind. The Sunday Times was fine, and between Sir Dennis Hamilton and Sir Harry Evans, they turned out a great paper.
Okay. According to Mr. Emery, you also said this in relation to the undertakings you gave to the Secretary of State. They're not worth the paper they're written on. Did you say that?
No.
Did you think that?
No.
So this is completely...
Certainly not. It was an act of Parliament.
Well, Sir Howard Evans was replaced by Mr. Charles Douglas Hume, who was the nephew of the Prime Minister in the 1960s.
He was the long-serving deputy editor.
Yes. And the paper was safely returned to the Tory fold, wasn't it?
I think you're putting that as though that was the motive, which wasn't.
Okay.
I only remember ever talking to Mr. Evans about policy once, when he came to me, shut the door behind him, and said, "Look, tell me what you want to say. What do you want me to say? And you needn't leave this room, but I will do it." And I said to him, "Harry, that is not my job. All I would say to you, and this is the nearest thing I ever came to instruction, was, please be consistent. Don't change sides day by day." I'm not talking political sides, but on issues.
According to Roy Greenslade's book Press Gang, Mr. Douglas Hume told Mr. Greenslade that you were one of the main powers behind the Thatcher throne. Do you feel that's right or not?
Doesn't sound like Mr. Douglas Hume to me. He was a pretty modest individual, but I don't know.
But were you one of the main powers behind the Thatcher
Whether I
throne?
was?
Yes.
No.
Lance Price's book Where Power Lies, page 254.
We were probably not the Times. The Sun. If you want to judge my thinking,
yes,
look at the Sun.
Yeah, I think the point was you personally, not the Sun, the Sunday Times, or the Times. You personally were one of the main powers behind the Thatcher throne. Do you think that's right?
No.
Did you consult with her regularly on every important matter of policy?
Certainly not.
On the issue of editorial control, you've given us some insight of a meeting you had with Mr. Evans when he was editor. You were interviewed in the context of the House of Lords' first report on communications, where they set out at Appendix 4 a summary of an interview which took place in September 2007. Now, just put one point to you, which is, or maybe two. Paragraph 49 of the appendix.
Where's that?
Just bear with me. Tab 18, I think.
Thank you.
49.
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Murdoch did not disguise the fact that he is hands-on both economically and editorially. He says that, quotes, "the law prevents him from instructing the editors of the Times and the Sunday Times. The independent board is there to make sure he cannot interfere, and he never says do this or that, although he often asks, what are you doing?" He explained that he nominates the editors of these two papers, but that the nominations are subject to approval of the independent board. His first appointment of an editor of the Times split the board, but was not rejected. He distinguishes between the Times and the Sunday Times and the Sun and the News of the World, and makes the same distinction between the New York Post and the Wall Street Journal. For the Sun and News of the World, he explained that he is a traditional proprietor. He exercises editorial control on major issues, like which party to back in a general election or policy on Europe. Now, have your interlocutors faithfully recorded what you told them?
Yes, I never gave instructions to the editor of the Times or the Sunday Times. I didn't say, what are you doing, what are you saying? Sometimes when I was available on a Saturday, I would call and say, what's the news today? That was idle curiosity, perhaps. Other times I'd ring on a Tuesday when I went from New York, when the Sunday Times would come in, and I would say, that was a damn fine paper you had this week. I probably wouldn't have read the editorial.
I think the big point, Mr. Murdoch, is the last sentence of 51, which in relation to the Sun and the News of the World. as it then was, he exercises editorial control on major issues like which party to back in a general election or policy on Europe. Have they got it right?
Page 51, paragraph 51?
Paragraph 50, actually.
Paragraph 50.
Oh, 50, I'm sorry.
No.
No, it's my mistake. Last sentence of 50.
It's not over the Times or the Sunday Times.
No. Sun and the News of the World.
Yes. Well, I never much interfere with the News of the World, I'm sorry to say. But, yes.
These are political issues. They're not sort of managerial issues. But you would agree with this sentence, would you?
Yeah, I'm interested. I'm a curious person who's interested in the great issues of the day. And I'm not good at holding my tongue.
So, but you did say you're sorry to say that you didn't intervene in relation to the News of the World. Why did you say that?
I'm not disowning it or saying it wasn't my responsibility to, but I was always closer to the Sun. It was a daily paper. There was something more urgent about it.
Did you have any role, Mr. Murdoch, in relation to the publication of the Hitler diaries in 1983?
I'm sorry to say, yes.
Is it fair to say that Lord Dacre, that's the historian Hugh Trevor Roper before he was ennobled, not Paul Dacre, that Lord Dacre was beginning to express doubts about the authenticity of the diaries and you overruled him?
No, that is a very small part of the story. When the editor told me very excitedly that they'd bought these British rights documents from a very, very reputable German publisher, Bertelsmann, he got Lord Dacre to go to Switzerland to examine those diaries, and Lord Dacre, after some hours with them, declared he thought they were genuine. Later, when it got closer to the time of publication, very close to the time of publication, and people were debating it, Lord Dacre then did show doubts. And I think a majority of us felt we should go ahead. And I take full responsibility for it. It was a major mistake I made, one I'll have to live with for the rest of my life.
Mr. Murdoch, this is a bit of a marathon rather than a sprint, so I think we'll take a break for a few minutes now, just to give the shorthand writer a break.
Thank you, sir.
Rise.
Mr. Murdoch, we're still on the theme of influence over editors. Rebecca Wade, as she then was, told the House of Lords committee in relation to you, I think it would be fair to say that before any appointment, he knew me pretty well. He would be aware of my views, both social views, cultural views, and political views. From your perspective, do you feel that you did know Rebecca Wade's social views, cultural views, and political views before you appointed her?
I certainly knew a lot of them, yes.
Okay. You've drawn attention to a piece in the New Statesman by Alice Miles, who worked for the Times, I think, for 10 years. She makes the point that you had no influence at the time over Times over editorial policy. So we note her view. She does say this, though: you have only to look at online forums today to see that the tabloid pursuit of gossip, scandal, and cheap titillation reflects rather than drives people's naturally grubby or lowbrow instincts. Do you agree with her or not?
No, I think that's a rather elitist view. But Now, I have to say that so much of that material is provided by paid public relations agents working for those people. It's our job also to look behind what we're being told.
So you say, well, you're fed a load of material by paid publicists in order to rectify the balance, as it were. It is not inappropriate to use intrusive means to pry into the lives of celebrities. Is that fair?
I didn't say that.
No.
I think it's perfectly fair. I don't believe in using hacking. I don't believe in using private detectives or whatever. I think that's just a lazy way of reporters not doing their job. But I think it is fair. When people are held up as great, or had themselves held up as iconic figures or great actors, that they'd be looked at. And sometimes, we just did an example of it with Mr. Simon Cowell. He wanted to tell it all himself. No, I think people, a lot of these people are very big in the lives of ordinary people. Big television stars, film stars, and of course, I must include politicians. If we're getting into the issue of privacy, I think people in public position, with public responsibilities, and I'd even include press proprietors in that. I don't think they're entitled to the same privacy as the ordinary man in the street. If we're going to have a transparent society, a transparent democracy, let's have everything out in the open.
Do you agree with the opinion which underlines the secondary part of Alice Miles' proposition, that the tabloids do pursue gossip, scandal and cheap titillation?
I think it's an overstatement, but no. Look, there's some of it. We're not perfect. I'm not saying we are, or that our competitors are, but we're nothing to what you see in the internet every day, which I might say has an ever-growing following.
Well, I may come back to that point in due course, Mr. Murdoch.
It's a bigger subject for later.
Just a few points in the 1980s, because we need to bring ourselves up to the 1990s.
Just before you leave the topic of privacy, you don't see a distinction, Mr. Murdoch, between, for example, politicians and one might say newspaper proprietors, and one might even include judges. I'd have to think about that. In those who hold themselves out or who are held out as exercising positions of influence, and on the other hand, somebody who is famous because they are a good actor, or because they're a film star, or because they've written a book. You don't see any distinction between the two. They don't hold themselves out as influences on the public. It's just that they're rather good at what they do.
I think people who hold great responsibility. I mean, I really welcomed, I was jealous, of the Daily Telegraph buying all the personal expense accounts of, which admittedly through second and third parties, but of the members of Parliament. I think the Sunday Times followed later with members of the House of Lords. And I thought that was a great public service. I've got to say that I'm disappointed the editor of the Times didn't buy them when they were offered to him first. And obviously the Director of Public Prosecutions has decided that was in the public interest and not something to prosecute. But
well, I think the Telegraph would argue that it wasn't illegal, but that's a slightly different point. The question I'm asking
they would indeed.
The question I'm asking you is whether there is a distinction.
They were gained illegally, but not by them. I mean, they were. Okay.
No, whether there is a distinction between those who hold themselves out as having a public figure, like politicians or like newspaper proprietors who affect the public, and those who don't come into that category, like people who've achieved fame, if you like, made money, if you like, because they are very good at what they do, whether it be acting or inventing something or in films or writing. They don't hold themselves out as having any public influence. If you do, yes, I accept that.
There is a different. It's a difficult subject, but I do think that politicians do hold themselves out as public figures, and there's certainly people of great responsibility, and sometimes it's right to look behind the facade. And I think that we've got to be prepared for that.
Well, I don't think I disagreed with that, but maybe we'll come back to it. Okay.
Now, Mr. Murdoch, the 1980s, one frankly wouldn't, given your perspective on the world, expect you to have supported Neil Kinnock's Labour Party. Do you regret any of the Sun's constant attacks on him?
I don't remember them. I remember the famous front page on the day of the election, which I thought was absolutely brilliant. Our problem with the Labour Party then, I mean, I think we would have supported the Labour Party in that election if it had a different policy. But you remember the famous Clause 4, which was the socialisation of everything in the country, nationalisation, all the means of production, etc., etc. We were certainly against that. And if there were personal attacks on Mr. Kinnock, I would apologise for it. I don't remember them. But I don't think it was... I mean, he was the personification of the leadership of the Labour Party. And it was fair to attack his policies. And even sometimes the way he expressed himself.
Well, Clause 4 had been part of the Labour Party's constitution, I think, since its inception. That would be a reason for never supporting the Labour Party, yet the Sun did until 1979, didn't it?
That could mean... Yes. There was the failure of the Heath government, there was support of Mr. Harold Wilson. I don't remember whether Mr. Callaghan ever stood for election.
1976 he was Prime Minister. Can I move on?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Polling day, the 11th of June.
We had very good relations with him and with Mr. Wilson.
Okay.
There was no thought of pursuing Clause 4 with them or by them.
Mr. Murdoch, can I take you to polling day on the 11th of June 1987, a dinner you attended at Cliveden in the evening, which is reported by Mr. Woodrow Wyatt, he says this, that Rupert turned up and sat near to us at one stage when Ken Livingstone appeared on the screen and put the Labour defeat to the dreadful lies and smears of the media. Rupert cried out, "That's me," and was delighted. Is that true?
I remember that party, and in that I was very late for it. And if I said that, then I'm afraid that was the influence of alcohol.
You didn't reflect any part of your thinking then, Mr. Murdoch, is that
That was
right?
a joke.
Well, an external observer might observe that Mrs. Thatcher might have won anyway, but let's not go into that. Can I deal with one point, because we've got...
I wasn't claiming victory.
No.
It was just a stupid, light-hearted remark.
Okay. Can I deal with one point which arises out of the merger of Sky Television and BSB, which took place on the 4th of November 1990. Now, on the 1st of November 1990, the Broadcasting Act of that year was passed. Do you recall that, Mr. Murdoch?
No, but I accept it.
Well, it preserved the exemptions, if I can be forgiven for simplifying it grossly, preserved the exemptions in relation to the provision of non-domestic satellite services. And of course Sky, which was your company, was operating out of Luxembourg, wasn't it?
Yes, well, we were broadcasting on a Luxembourg satellite.
That's right. So it was non-domestic for these purposes, and the Act preserved the status quo, although there was plenty of opposition to it from the Labour Party. Do you follow me?
I take your word for it. I don't remember it.
Do you remember a discussion on the 31st of March 1990 with Mr. Wyatt? Maybe I should put it
No,
to
I
you.
think he might have been Lord Wyatt by then, but no, I don't.
It's in his diaries.
I went to a few dinner parties he gave, which he always had interesting people at.
This was at your flat, apparently. It was a Saturday, 31st of March. It's page 262 of volume... Pardon me, I've got to be sure which volume it is. I think it's volume 2, which in the bundle is going to be tab 15. It was the day of the anti-poll tax riots in Trafalgar Square. That may enable you to locate it in time.
I don't know what you're referring to. I remember the poll tax and the controversy.
Really, if I can invite you to look at page 265, you see the extract about halfway through that page. I told him, the I here is Lord Wyatt, the him is you, I was fairly confident that he would be all right when the bill, that's the broadcasting bill.
Well, I'm sorry.
Are you with me? It's about halfway.
Not on the exact quote. But
It's page 265 of volume 2.
oh, 265.
265.
Yes.
I told him I was fairly confident he would be all right when the bill came to the Lords. This is the broadcasting bill, because it was now backed by the government. Margaret is very keen on preserving your position. That's the exemption I referred to. She knows how much she depends on your support. Likewise, you depend on hers in this matter. Did Lord Wyatt say that? Or something like that?
I have no memory of that, and if I'm right, he was writing this many years afterwards, and I wouldn't put too much weight on Lord Wyatt's.
Well, rightly or wrongly, he was dictating these memoirs.
He liked to
as he was
the
going
impression
along.
always that he was close to Mrs. Thatcher. I don't really believe that Mrs. Thatcher had that much time on her hands, but never mind.
But it's really the point he was making, that Mrs. Thatcher depended on your support and you depended on her support. This is her support in the commercial arena because of your interests in what was then just Sky Television PLC, but was to become the following year, or sorry, later this year, the merger of the two companies. Do you see that?
I see what he's saying. I don't agree with it, but
okay. Well, I will move on, if I may. To 1990, the November of that year.
you know, Mrs. Thatcher had much more than me supporting her in the press. Other big newspapers. And, you know, editorials don't get read by that many people. It's, but there was the Daily Telegraph there, which even then was the mouthpiece of the Tory party, and the Daily Mail. There were a lot of different opinions being put, but I was not the only one supporting her.
Well, your company consistently had about 36% of the newspaper market, didn't it? You were the biggest player, as it were, in 1990. You're the biggest player now, aren't you?
If you're talking about newspapers alone, yes. Well, put it this way. I go to election every year, Mr. J, every day. People can stop buying my newspapers anytime. Often do, I'm afraid. It is only natural for politicians to reach out to editors and sometimes proprietors, if they're available, to explain what they're doing and hoping that makes an impression and that gets through.
Okay.
But I was only one of several. And today I'm only one of several, as I think we've seen demonstrated the last few days.
Now, the Sunday Times in November 1990 endorsed Mr. Heseltine against Mrs. Thatcher. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And Mr. Andrew Neil, in his book, makes it clear that that was his, that's to say Andrew Neil's decision, and not your decision. Do you follow me?
Yes.
To be out of fairness to you, he says this: he, that's you, kept to the letter of his promises to Parliament of editorial independence when he bought Times newspapers in 1981. But do you agree that your 4 other titles supported Mrs. Thatcher?
Well, I think the Sun, the News, the World did. I don't remember where the Times was, but I certainly don't remember the Times coming up for Mr. Heseltine or anyone else, but I don't know.
Okay. Now, Mr. Neil, having been very fair to you in his book, makes it clear that it was his decision. Yes, he's less fair in other parts, but the point I'm making is that it may go to the credibility of what he says, that he's not consistently hostile to you. He reports a telephone conversation he had with you in November 1990 over the Thatcher-Heseltine issue, where you said this: it's your decision, in other words, Mr. Neil's decision, but the paper will be seen to have turned tail when the going got rough. Heseltine would be disastrous, and then this is the most important part, we owe Thatcher a lot as a company, don't go overboard in your attacks on her. Do you think you said that?
I don't think so. I certainly have no memory of it.
We owe Thatcher a lot as a company.
My memory of that is that the first I knew of it was when I read it in the paper. I don't remember any preliminary discussion with Mr. Neil about that, his editorial.
Well, there's a difference between Mr. Neil making the decision, which he did, and you having a discussion with him about it, which would not be improper.
No, but I don't think I have one.
Okay. So on this point, you part company with Mr. Neil, is that right?
Yes.
In 1992, the famous headline, "It's the Sun what won it." Did you appreciate that headline?
No.
Did you give...
I understand that Mr. Mackenzie said I gave him a terrible bollocking.
Yes.
I don't remember it. I thought it was a little over-enthusiastic, but my son, who's here today and was apparently beside me, said I did indeed give him a hell of a bollocking.
Well, that's very frank, Mr. Murdoch. But the point may be this, that you would not want it to appear that newspapers did have this influence over voters, because that might be said to be anti-democratic. Would you agree with that?
I think saying anti-democratic is too strong a word, but I just thought it was tasteless and wrong for us. It was wrong in fact. We don't have that sort of power. I think if you, well, you can't do it now, but if you go to after an election and you see a newspaper that's taken a very strong line, particularly The Sun, and ask their readers how did they vote, there'll be no unanimity. And maybe 60-40 one way, whatever. I think some papers you can recognise as having very strong Conservative roots and some very strong Labour roots, but you can't say that of The Sun. I think we're perhaps the only independent newspaper in the business.
But I just want to explore with you a little bit the factors which might go into the decision of The Sun to support certain parties. If one looks at the 1992 election, that was Mr. Kinnock's last election. The Labour Party manifesto included a commitment to, I quote, establish an urgent inquiry by the Monopolies and Mergers Commission into the concentration of media ownership. So in other words, they were out to get you. Do you follow me?
Sounds like that.
So it's self-evident that had the Labour Party won that election, that would have been heavily disadvantageous to the commercial interests of your company, wouldn't it?
That's what they say afterwards, yes. But that was obviously their intent, or would have been their intent, if they'd carried through. I doubt it, but...
So the support The Sun gave to the Tory party, not that it was the strongest support, because you, to put it bluntly, weren't that appreciative of Sir John Major.
Or his government.
Pardon me, Mr. Murdoch?
Or his government.
Yeah.
Well, we were reading in all papers of cabinet divisions.
But part of the reason for supporting the Conservative Party in that election, apart from macroeconomic considerations, was that a Labour victory would have been disastrous to your commercial interests in this country, wouldn't it?
No. I didn't know Mr. Kinnock had those plans to move against us afterwards. If he ever did, really. You know, people say things in defeat which come to them suddenly, but it was certainly not part of his policy before the election.
Well, it was part of his manifesto, and he was extremely angry after the election. I think it was on the 13th of April 1992. He blamed his defeat on you, to put it bluntly. It's reasonable to suppose that had he got in, he would have been right after you and your company, wouldn't he?
Well, I hope not.
You might hope not, but that, afraid Mr. Murdoch, it would have happened, wouldn't it? And you well knew it would have happened.
I don't think so. I don't think politicians always act so irresponsibly as that.
Well, I'm not commenting on the merits of the policy. I'm commenting just on the fact of the policy.
Yes, but I'm only commenting on the likelihood of it being followed, or whether it will be followed or not.
Is it fair to say...
We're dealing in hypotheticals.
Right. Mr. Murdoch, is it fair to say that you generally back the winning side?
No. I'm trying to think when we didn't, but that's certainly true. The last election in America, both the Wall Street Journal and the New York Post certainly opposed the almost certain victory of President Obama.
I'm talking about the United Kingdom.
I realize that, but we work on the same principles everywhere.
Well, of course, no one is omniscient, and you might get it wrong. And I'm not saying that you always back the winning side, but you usually back...
But your point in relation to America is rather different, isn't it, Mr. Murdoch? Because what you're saying was that you recognise that the then Democratic candidate was going to win, but you still were going to say, well, we don't think he should. That's
how I see it.
That's rather... Yes, but that's rather different from your deliberately trying to find the winning candidate.
Well, I'm just saying I don't try to find the winning candidate. I try to judge the candidates on the issues.
Because it is said about you that you like to back the winning side because that is the best way to foment your commercial interests. Would you agree with that or not?
No, I wouldn't. I never let my commercial interests, whatever they are, enter into any consideration at elections. So give me an instance.
Well, we'll have a look at very soon, actually, at what happened in the run-up to the 1997 election. But can I just deal with one point? Lord Patten, currently chairman of the BBC, gave evidence to us in January. And he commented that he felt it was demeaning that so many politicians, and I think he was largely identifying Conservative politicians, were close to you and trying to curry favour with you. That's my words, not his. Did you sense that at the time or not?
No, I don't know many politicians. I can't think who'd be thinking about 97.
So 92, Mr. Murdoch. Lord Patten was chairman of the Conservative Party in 92, and he ran that election for them. And he was just...
Not very well, would seem. Well, I take that back. He lost it.
No, he won it, Mr. Murdoch. He won it.
92?
Yes, he won. They didn't win by very much, but they won, the Conservative Party. Against the...
Oh, we're back to the Major government.
Yes.
I had met Mr. Major. I don't remember meeting... I no doubt did, but I don't remember meeting any leading figures at the time. I didn't know Mr. Heseltine, I didn't know Mr. Portillo, I just don't know.
But did you not wonder at any stage, and we're looking now at 1992, why it was that politicians were so keen to win your support?
Politicians, let's be clear, always seek the support of all newspapers and all media outlets. And I think that is part of democracy.
Yes, but with you, Mr. Murdoch, it's slightly more pointed than that. First of all, you own the greatest share, and have done since the acquisition of the Times papers in 1981. And secondly, the Sun is so important because it's emblematic and there's so many floating voters. And therefore, whereas a Times reader is unlikely to be impacted one way or another by endorsement of a particular political party by the Times, a Sun reader might be, or at least that is the perception. Do you
yes,
agree
I
with
think
that?
when you add figures like this, in fairness to me, you have to really exclude the Times. Has the Sun got a large audience? Yes, certainly. Do people follow everything we say? Certainly not. We hope that by raising issues and so on, we can have influence, things we believe in, but it's not political parties as such. We try to, our approach to public affairs is to take issues by issues.
So, I think your evidence is this, Mr. Murdoch. You are completely oblivious to the commercial benefits to your company of a particular party winning an election.
Absolutely.
Is that really the position?
Yes, absolutely.
So this is an entirely, as it were, I'm not saying idealistic approach, because that would be putting it too high, but in one sense it's political and ideological, and commercial considerations are wholly subordinated. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I have no commercial interest except the newspaper. I love newspapers.
But don't you, put another way, owe some duty to your shareholders at least to further the best interests of your companies?
Well, they tell me so. They'd like me to get rid of them all.
Okay, well, can we look at the rise of Tony Blair, if I can put it in those terms? He was elected Labour leader 21st of July 1994. On the 9th of August 1994, according to Mr. Mullin's book, A Walk on Part, but I think you can take it from me, you said publicly that you can or could imagine backing Mr. Blair. Do you remember saying that, or at least thinking that?
I don't remember it, but it's quite possible.
Because by that stage, you had lost faith with the Major government, hadn't you?
Yes.
And
we'd had, many, many, many years of Tory government.
That's right.
And I think it's good for democracy to change.
And it was pretty obvious, as the years wore on, that the Labour Party was going to win convincingly, wasn't it?
I don't remember that at all.
Well, they won by a landslide, I think, of 164 seats on the 1st of May 1997. And
that might have become apparent very much later. But
well, I think
I certainly can't say I knew that 3 years before.
No, well, the precise nature of the landslide, maybe not, but it was obvious to any political observer that Blair was going to win, wasn't it? Long before that election.
Might have been to you, it wasn't to me. A lot of things can happen in politics in 3 years.
Do you remember a private dinner on the 15th of September 1994 arranged by Gus Fisher, who's an employee of, or was an employee of News International, at a place called Mossyman's?
No. I read reference to it, but I have frankly no reference. I don't even know where Mossyman's is.
It's described by Mr. Neal as a fancy private restaurant club in a former Belgravia church. Does that help at all?
No, it doesn't.
Well, this is noted in Mr. Neal's book, on the edition I'm working from, but I'm afraid there are two editions. It's page 209. It's tab 10. Maybe a different page in your version. Might be 169 in your version. Can I ask which version that is? Is that the 1997? Okay, so it's
209?
Yes. It's the bottom of the page, 209. So in your version, it might be page 169, confusingly. The dinner went well. This is the bottom of the page. Blair discovered Rupert was not the ogre his party had painted, And Rupert found what Blair had to say a refreshing change from the usual Labour nostrils. So far, so good?
I think I've already said I don't remember the dinner, but it sounds quite like a very possible conversation.
Both revelled in being self-styled radicals impatient with the old Britain. Correct? Certainly as regards you.
That would describe me, certainly.
Yes. Blair indicated that media ownership rules would not be onerous under Labour. Did he say that?
I have no memory of that.
Well, as it happens, media ownership rules were not onerous under Labour. So it might be true, mightn't it?
No.
You don't think he said that?
No, well, he might have said it, but I don't think it was true that they were always without being onerous.
Well, the Labour Party policy at the 1997 election and its policy under government was certainly not the policy that the Kinnock Labour Party had threatened to implement in 1992, was it?
No.
And then reading on with Mr. Neil, Rupert, that his newspapers were not wedded to the Tories. Might you have said that?
Oh, certainly.
And then Mr. Neil continues, the union...
I wasn't wedded to Labour either.
No. That becomes clear. The union issue was not resolved. Labour remains committed to giving workers the legal right to collective bargaining if over 50% of any workforce votes for union recognition. Well, that was something that you had in your mind in 1994, didn't you? Labour Party policy on unions.
Probably. And it was a very large issue in this country, and how strikes could be called, whether it had to be a majority of all the workers or just the people present, and so on.
And then according to Mr. Neil's source, of course we don't know who that is, because I don't think Mr. Neil was at this little dinner. Well, he certainly says all the right things, remarked Rupert after Blair had departed, but we're not letting our pants down just yet. Well, might you have said that?
I might have. I've told you I don't know the dinner took place, but yes, go ahead.
Well, it's really whether it's the sort of thing you might have said, because there are certain things which I'm sure you wouldn't say if I put it to you. You had said something, you'd know immediately. Well, I couldn't have said that because I would never say that sort of thing.
It's quite possible I said that.
Now, the Hayman Island trip, which I think was in July 1995, when Mr. Blair flew best part of 25 hours, I think, to speak at your conference at Hayman Island at your invitation. Do you remember that, Mr. Murdoch?
Very vividly.
I think Mr. Paul Keating, who was the Australian Prime Minister, was also there, wasn't he?
Yes. And the leader of the opposition from Australia, Mr. Howard.
Yes.
And I think some other interesting speakers, but yes.
According to Alistair Campbell's diaries, I don't think we need to turn them up. Mr. Keating said this, that you can do deals with him without ever saying a deal is done. Do you think that's a fair observation?
No.
Do you understand the point that Mr. Keating is making there?
I understand what you're saying, yes, but that's not true. Mr. Keating is given to very extravagant language. I thought you were going to quote something much more extravagant.
Well, I was, but I wasn't going to.
I'm sorry.
It's not necessary to create everything, as you say, the extravagant language I will edit out on this occasion. But what about this? But the only thing he cares about is his business, and the only language he respects is strength. Is that a fair insight into you?
Certainly not.
And then Mr. Keating also said, according to Mr. Campbell, that you like to be associated with winners. quote, and this is Mr. Keating speaking, if he thinks you're a winner, he'd prefer to be with you than against you. It's spot on, isn't it, Mr. Murdoch?
No, I mean, I think we all like to back a winning racehorse or whatever. Yes, you'd like to be in the winning side, but no, that was not a motivation.
You gave a little speech apparently after Mr. Blair's speech, and his speech was a roaring success according to everyone who was there, and we've heard some evidence about it.
A standing ovation from everybody there.
Yes. You said this, apparently, if our flirtation is ever consummated, Tony, then I suspect we will end up making love like porcupines very, very carefully. Did you say that?
I might have.
Yes. But as you point out in your witness statement, the Sun in 1995 remained non-committal, didn't it?
95, yes.
Yes. And the endorsement only came late in the day, in March 1997, didn't it?
I forget the dates, but
Yeah,
I'll take your word for it, Mr. J.
I mean, was it part of your strategy, Mr. Murdoch, that you, as it were, would wait as long as possible to endorse the Labour Party, because that was the best way of extracting commercial advantages from them?
Certainly not.
Were you tracking Labour Party policy on media issues at this point?
I don't think so.
I
I wasn't even in the country, but yes. No.
Well, weren't you asking your lieutenants who were in the country to do just that? Because it would be of keen commercial interest to your companies to know what Labour Party's policy on media issues was likely to be, wouldn't it?
Yeah. What could they have done?
Pardon me, Mr. Murdoch?
I said, what could they have done? I don't think so.
Well, they could, if they were minded, or of like mind to Mr. Kinnock's Labour Party, to have invited the Monopolies and Mergers Commission or its successor to undertake an investigation into the issue of cross-media ownership and concentration of media ownership into your companies, couldn't they?
They're welcome.
It is obvious that's something you wouldn't want, would you?
Well, it would be a diversion, but that's fine.
But weren't you reassured when the 1997 Labour manifesto did not contain any legislative proposals on media ownership, by which I mean concentration of media ownership and cross-media ownership?
I don't even remember noticing it.
Is that right, Mr. Murdoch? I mean, quite apart from whoever you supported, presumably as a businessman with very substantial interests in this country, you'd be very interested in what every party was saying in their manifestos that might impact upon the way in which you did business, wouldn't you?
Yes. Yes, sir. But I wanted to make it quite clear that my commercial interests, such as they are, or whatever you want to describe them, never came into any consideration on where we stood on issues or political parties.
Can I refer you to an extract from Alistair Campbell's Diary, Volume 1, page 634, entry for the 3rd of February 1997. It's going to be tab 2.
I'm sorry. Yes.
8 lines down, I think. The sentence.
Saturday, February the 1st. Are we on the right page?
No,
page 633?
634, please, Mr. Murdoch. We're the 3rd of February.
Yes.
And the sentence beginning about 8 lines down, TB and GB. Do you have that one?
Yes.
Went to see Murdoch, Les Hinton and Owen Stelzer. And Mr. Campbell's footnote, Rupert Murdoch's economic guru. Was he that?
No.
TB...
He was a friend and someone I enjoyed talking to. He's a fine economist.
Okay. TB said GB had been fine, sounded more sceptic than usual on the single currency. That's a reference to a speech Mr. Brown had given. TB's sense...
Oh, GB is Gordon Brown.
Of course. TB's sense was that Murdoch wanted to back us, but the senior people at The Sun, probably with Trevor Kavanagh in the lead, were telling him he must be mad. Is that correct?
I don't remember. It's possible.
TB said that he felt we got a fair crack on some issues, but not on Europe. Murdoch said he hated the idea of the single currency, full stop. Might you have said that?
Most certainly.
But by and
I
large,
had arguments for 10 years with Mr. Blair about the subject.
But by and large, TB felt it went okay. They agreed to differ on a few things, but his sense was Murdoch was reassured on the economy, tax, etc., and had lost any kind of respect for Major and the Tories. Well, that's certainly true, isn't it?
Yes.
TB didn't like having to deal with them. He knew that they were right-wing and only even thinking of backing us because they wanted to back winners and be in a better position to deal with us if we did win. But he felt there was something unpleasant about newspaper power and influence. I'm not going to ask you to comment on Mr. Blair's state of mind, as it were, because that wouldn't be fair. But didn't you sense in these discussions you were having with senior politicians before a general election that a sort of form of pirouette or negotiation was occurring, and they wanted to know how far they had to go?
You're making sinister inferences.
No, it's not
I want to say, Mr. J, that I, in 10 years of his power there, never asked Mr. Blair for anything, nor indeed did I receive any favours. And if you want to check that, I think you should call him.
I don't think that was my question, Mr. Murdoch. It was a more subtle question.
Indeed it was.
That the interchange between a sophisticated politician and a sophisticated newspaper proprietor would not be a hard-nosed commercial negotiation, how much to pay for something. It would be at a far higher and more subtle level. It would be each trying to work out how much to give and how much to press for. Do you follow me?
I'm afraid I don't have much subtlety about me.
Don't you, Mr. Murdoch?
No.
Okay. But did you at least sense that this sort of encounter with Mr. Blair and Mr. Brown, so they were the two most powerful people in the then Labour opposition just before a general election, that they were very anxious to sound you out and see what your thinking was? Didn't you at least sense that?
No, I think they probably wanted to convince me that they were the right people to be leading Britain, and I'm sure they were doing that to every other press proprietor.
But you didn't feel that they were sizing you up, trying to work out what you were thinking, what was necessary from their perspective they had to do to win your support?
No, I think you must ask them that.
Okay, Mr. Campbell's diary, entry for the 10th of March 1997, page 664. This is a short one, so you probably don't need to turn it up.
664.
664.
Oh.
Let me just read it to you. It's probably not necessary to look at it, but you can, of course, if you wish to.
I'm sorry.
TB spoke to Owen Stelzer later, who said Murdoch was moving towards supporting us again. For commercial reasons, they would probably make clear who they were backing at the start of the campaign. Might you have had that discussion with Mr. Stelzer?
No, if he said that, he certainly had no right to.
Isn't that the sort of thing that you did discuss with Mr. Stelzer?
No. I want to state, I don't know how many times I have to state to you, Mr. Jay, that I never took commercial considerations.
So Mr. Stelzer's got completely the wrong end of the stick then, hasn't he?
Yes. Well,
no, he's not actually. With respect, Mr. Murdoch, if one reads it carefully, he's not suggesting quite that. What he's saying is that Mr. Stelzer was, as it were, providing feedback, which sounds as though it's accurate, that you were moving towards supporting the Labour Party. And then he's making a slightly separate point that actually they'd only make clear who they were backing at the start of the campaign. And that might be for commercial reasons connected with wanting to sell copies of your newspaper, neither more nor less.
That's possible. I thought Mr. Jay was putting more sinister motives on it.
Well, I'm not sure I was seeking to put a sinister motive. I think one possible interpretation might be the commercial reasons are to do with the long-term interests of your companies in the face of what government policy might be on media ownership. You see the point?
Could you repeat that, Alan?
The commercial reasons are a reference to what future government policy might be on topics such as media ownership, which would affect the commercial interests of News International, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Now, in the run-up to the endorsement of the Sun was on Labour was on the 18th of March 1997. According to this is Mr. Neil's.
Are we still on page 664?
No, we're not. We're on Mr.
book.
Neil's full disclosure, tab 10, and it's the 1997 edition preface, which is Little Roman 24.
Yes.
If you look 5 lines down from the top of Little Roman 24, he says this, and this relates to what happened on the 17th of March 1997.
This is Mr. Neil.
Yes. Blair went the final mile for Rupert in an article for The Sun right at the start of the election campaign. He flew the Union flag and wrote in highly Eurosceptical tones, Rupert was delighted. Were you delighted?
I don't remember, but I would have been. He flew the Union flag and wrote in highly Eurosceptical tones. Yes.
And then he, that's you, saw no reason to delay his endorsement for Labour any longer, especially since all the polls made Blair overwhelming favourite to be the next Prime Minister anyway. And then the following day we have the endorsement. That endorsement was your decision, wasn't it, Mr. Murdoch?
Well, it certainly would have been with my approval.
Some would say, looking at this, you had extracted really as much as you could from Mr. Blair in terms of policy promises. He'd gone a considerable distance in your direction. You assessed he'd gone as far as he was ever going to go, so you endorsed him. That's right, isn't it?
No, I think so. I don't think it all followed in this way so logically, but yes.
Now, Mr. Neil's assessment, it's right that I put this to you because it confirms something you said, but he adds an additional point. It's Little Roman 25. He says, I do not believe that there was an explicit deal between Murdoch and Blair in which the Sun gave its support in return for promises that a Labour government would leave Rupert's British media empire alone. So you presumably would strongly agree with that, Mr. Murdoch?
Absolutely.
But then he says, but there was an implicit understanding, never openly talked about between the two men, but an understanding nevertheless. Do you have a comment on that?
That's not true. I think that he, if it was true, he said he didn't keep to it because he appointed Ofcom with wide powers to interfere with us in every way.
I think we'll have another 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Murdoch, I've been asked by a call participant to put you a short and straightforward point in relation to a piece Mr. Blair wrote in the Times on the 31st of March 1997, which was 1 month and 1 day before the election. Are you with me chronologically?
Yes.
He said this, and indeed I remember it quite clearly. Let me state the position clearly, so that no one is in any doubt. The essential elements of the trade union legislation of the 1980s will remain. So he is saying that he's not going to dismantle the Thatcher reforms. Are you with me?
Yes.
And he also said the changes that we do propose would leave British law the most restrictive on trade unions in the Western world. So this must have been music to your ears, mustn't it?
I don't think I read it, but yes.
According to what you've disclosed of your meetings with leaders of the opposition, there was dinner with Mr. Blair that very evening, the 31st of March 1997. Do you think you discussed that article and congratulated him for it?
I doubt it, but it's possible.
Now, Labour Party win the election 1st May 1997. Can we move forward to March 1998 and a piece which appeared in La Stampa on the 24th of March? Now, they claimed that the Italian Prime Minister, who was then Romano Prodi, had taken a call from Mr. Blair in which they discussed your multi-million pound offer for Mediaset, which was one of Berlusconi's companies.
Multi-billion, yes.
Multi-billion. Did I say million?
Yes.
Billion. And Mr. Prodi allegedly told Mr. Blair that he preferred an Italian bidder. Can we try and examine what truth, if any, there is behind that story? Did you speak to Mr. Blair on the 17th of March 1998 and ask him to speak to Mr. Prodi to say that he shouldn't interfere?
No. I may have spoken to him. I had my own access to Mr. Prodi. I had been with him already and talked about it, and that Mr. Berlusconi had not only come to me with his company, wanted to get rid of it, and that we'd had negotiations. And I asked him what was his view. And he said, well, I wish there was an Italian bidder. I would have preferred that. But it was a friendly conversation. I don't say he agreed to anything. But I knew him slightly, and I had my own access. I didn't need Mr. Blair to be calling him. I may well have spoken to Mr. Blair separately and said, how do you think a British industry is going to get on in a country like Italy?
But it stopped there. You didn't ask Mr. Blair to phone Mr. Prodi up?
No.
You couldn't have said anything which gave Mr. Blair that impression that you wanted him to intervene on his behalf?
No, I never asked Mr. Blair for favours.
But to be fair, what happened is that Mr. Blair, according to Mr. Campbell, said he would think about it, but in the end the phone call came from Prodie to Mr. Blair rather than the other way round. That's page 331 of Mr. Campbell's diaries. But
right, I wasn't
you
privy to
you can't comment on that. May I ask you, Mr. Murdoch, to deal with another piece of evidence the inquiry received from Lord Patton, which was along the lines that Lord Patton was writing a book about Hong Kong, because of course he was the last governor of Hong Kong, and HarperCollins, one of your companies, was the publisher. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do indeed.
And according to Lord Patton, you learnt that HarperCollins were going to publish the book. This coincided with his always doomed attempts to extend his empire into China, and effectively you pulled the book. Is that right?
Half right.
Half right. Which bit's right
I
and
did
which
not
is wrong?
have any influence or interest in China, not for lack of wanting or trying, but I had always taken the view that Mr. Patton was a bad governor of Hong Kong, and it raised very false expectations. And when I first heard of this book, I said, I hope we don't do it. And when I heard that it was about to hit the streets or very close, I did step in and say, don't do it, which I wish to say now was one more mistake of mine. It was clearly wrong.
Weren't you hoping to acquire commercial interests in China at that point?
No. Well, it's a huge market. We're always looking for opportunities there, but it's just too difficult.
But in December 2001, you were given permission by the Chinese authorities to launch a cable TV channel in China, weren't you?
There were endless negotiations, and we finally got permission to do this, which turned out to be a Mandarin channel in a small Cantonese-speaking section of China.
But you've gone to...
Oh, not so small, but it was Cantonese.
But from that foothold, you've done quite well in China, haven't you, no? From that small foothold, you've advanced your commercial interest in China.
No.
Okay.
We have thrown whatever we had there, which was losing money, I mean, $1 million or two, into a joint venture, which we're in the minority, with Shanghai Media. That's about a year or two old.
Now move forward to the 2001 election here. According to Mr. Campbell's diaries, volume 3, page 439...
I'm sorry, what year?
This is a conversation, or rather a diary entry, for the 30th of October 2000. Volume 3, page 439.
Yes.
The entry reads, it's the bottom of the page, very bottom of the page. TB saw Murdoch and Erwin Stelzer, Mr. Campbell is glossing that, Murdoch advisor. He had asked him outright whether they were going to back us. Murdoch said the Tories were unelectable, and that was that. Is this a faithful account of what happened, Mr. Murdoch?
I have no memory of it at all. I'm sorry, I can't help you.
But might you have said that the Tories were unelectable?
No, I don't think so. I don't think they were.
Well, by saying unelectable, you meant they were bound to lose, I think, which is what.
Well, if I said that, you keep putting words into my mouth, Mr. J.
Well, I hope I don't. It's only what Mr. Campbell here is reporting.
Yes, but you're putting other words.
And I've told you I have no memory of any such conversation. I'm not saying it's wrong. I just had the wrong interpretation of what was said.
Okay. It may be that Mr. Blair got to know you quite well by now and did feel able to ask you outright whether you were going to back him. Do you see that?
I can't believe he was so direct as that. I met Mr. Blair, if you look at the record, an average of 2, maybe 3 times, sometimes in a whole year. It's not as though, there was a constant approach or daily text messages, as happened with some newspapers. We had no such relationship. They were usually taken up, I remember, an afternoon at Chequers, where we spent the whole afternoon debating the euro. And I remember what was said. And he didn't agree with me. I'm glad to see that I've turned out right, but that's another matter.
Well, to be fair to you, Mr. Murdoch, your great concern was that the United Kingdom might enter the euro. That is right, isn't it?
My feeling about it, if you want to debate the euro, was that it was a great abdication of power over our own affairs.
I'm not sure I do want to debate the euro, but what I do want, just to establish, so out of fairness to you, that was your concern, wasn't it, that the United Kingdom might enter the euro?
Yes, it was a purely intellectual point of view.
The March 2003 Gulf War, all 175 papers around the world which you owned backed the war, didn't they?
I don't know, 475.
175.
Well, that would include a lot of little suburban papers, free sheets and things which wouldn't have had a view. But yes, we did support the war, as did most papers, including even the New York Times.
Now, some years after the event, it was discovered that there were 3 telephone calls between you and Mr. Blair in March 2003 where the issue of the Gulf War must have been discussed. Do you follow me, Mr. Murdoch?
Well, it must have been on his mind at that time, so it was such a big issue. I don't remember the calls. The 11th might even have been calling me for my birthday, but no, our position on the war had been declared very strongly in all our newspapers and the Sun well before that date.
Yes. Well, to be clear, Mr. Murdoch, the discussion could not...
So he wouldn't have been calling me for support?
No. The discussion could not have been about whether you were going to support him, because, as you rightly say, that support had already been given. So the discussion must have been about something else.
Well,
the version Mr. Rawnsley...
I don't think we can just personalise it to Mr. Blair, but to the war.
Mr. Rawnsley's version, in a book called The End of the Party, page 160, was that you...
Who's he?
He's a political commentator, but in a sense it doesn't matter what he says. It's really whether you agree with this point, that you and Mr. Blair were devising the best strategy for attacking President Chirac. Do you think that's what was discussed during these calls?
I doubt it very much.
Why, Mr. Murdoch? Why?
Well, I don't think Mr. Blair would come to me for advice on a matter like that.
But why not? Because you had the Sun.
Well, why would he? I mean, he's surely above talking to a press proprietor about his foreign relations with France. It was well known that the Sun was pretty rude about the French from time to time.
Well, the articles in the Sun about this time described President Chirac as the alert French worm and a cheap tart who puts price before principle. Did that have anything to do with you?
No.
Okay. The 2005 election, Mr. Murdoch, this is the last of Blair's victories. Did you make it a condition of support for the Labour Party that the government hold a referendum on the new EU constitution?
No, we didn't make any conditions, but we certainly expressed the opinion strongly that the EU constitution should be put to the people. And I don't think we were alone in that. As it happened, it didn't have to be, because it depended on unanimity between all the countries, and other countries, at least one, had voted against it, so that it was pointless to have a referendum.
Yes. Well, in the end, as you rightly say, there wasn't a referendum for the reasons you've given, but what's said in another book by Mr. Richards this time, that Mr. Blair held regular talks with Owen Stelzer, including talks on that issue. And Mr. Stelzer would have been communicating your views. Is that right or not?
No. Mr. Stelzer was a distinguished economist, had his own views.
But in no sense was he communicating your views then to the Prime Minister? Is that?
No.
Well, you don't know whether he was or he wasn't. Were you discussing...
Well, he may have been, I don't know.
That's the point.
It would have been a coincidence.
But it would be something that you would talk to him about.
If I was seeing a lot of him?
That's the point. You've already spoken very, very highly of him, and therefore it's the sort of thing you might very well discuss with him.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
My only point in answering Mr. J was that he was not there to carry a message from me.
I understand.
Well, there would be a question, I'm sure Dr. Owen Stelzer, with all his intellectual abilities, would have his own ideas on this and every other topic, but in one sense he would know your thinking, and he would be able to discuss that with Mr. Blair, wouldn't he?
Probably, yes. He was actually closer to Mr. Andrew Neil than he was to me.
Okay. Now, Mr. Blair leaves in 2007. Did you have a view as to who should succeed him?
I thought the matter was settled.
Well, according to Mr. Blair's biography, A Journey, page 655, it's just a couple of sentences. I don't think it's necessary to turn it up. Mr. Blair's view is, there was no contest for the leadership. John Reed could have stood, but the Murdoch papers, I fear at Rupert's instigation, just wrote him off. Do you remember doing that?
No, that's quite untrue. I'd met Mr. Reed a couple of times, and I liked him and admired him.
Well, you didn't write him off?
I didn't know that he was a contender for the job.
Okay.
Or possible contender.
Now, your relations with Mr. Brown until the 30th of September 2009, which was when the Sun, as it were, dropped him and supported the Conservatives, were quite warm, weren't they?
My personal relationship with Mr. Brown was always warm, but before he became Prime Minister and after. And I regret that after the Sun came out of him, that's not so true, although I only hope that they can be repaired.
There may have been a number of reasons why your personal relations were good, but one obvious one perhaps was your common Presbyterian upbringing. Is that right?
Yes.
Can we see if we can possibly explode one of the myths you've mentioned? But we know that you stayed at Chequers the weekend of the 6th and 7th of October 2007, or at least there on one of those days. Do you remember that?
Was that the pajama party weekend?
No. We're coming to that. That's the 14th of June 2008, Mr. Murdoch. No, this is.
I do remember being once, at least, but I think only once, at Chequers as the guest of Mr. and Mrs. Brown, and there were certainly other people there, because I remember the outstanding thing in my memory was it was the first time I met J.K. Rowling, who was a close friend of, so at least of Mrs. Brown.
Did you have any discussions with Mr. Brown about whether there should be a snap election?
No.
Were you aware of the...
Let me say I don't remember any, and I'm sure he didn't ask me. No.
Well, there is evidence somewhere, I think in Mr. Rawnsley's...
You know, if any politician wanted my opinions on major matters, they only had to read the editorials in the Sun.
Well, Mr. Rawnsley, page 507, says that the decision to call off a snap election was taken before the 6th of October. So if he's right, you couldn't have discussed it with Mr. Brown, but maybe we can't really get any...
So who says I did?
Well, others have suggested it, but we've heard your evidence on the topic, Mr. Murdoch. I'm not going to press that any further. If you forgive me, can I move forward with Mr. Brown? June 2008. If we can take just 1 month. The documents demonstrate that you had dinner with Mr. Brown on the 6th of June and your respective wives were present. Would you accept that?
Yes.
The 14th of June was the famous slumber party where I don't believe you were present.
I think there were just a bunch of women.
Yes. 15th...
Complaining about their husbands, probably.
Yes. 15th of June, you were Mr. Brown's guest at a Downing Street dinner for President Bush. Do you remember that? And the 16th of June...
It was a large party. I mean,
yes.
There was no...
There'd be about 30 or 40 people there, wouldn't there?
Yes, I'm sure there were other people there from the press.
And then the 16th of June, Mr. Brown attends your annual summer party.
Yes, I think so. Most people did.
Now, were you involved in any way in the timing of the decision to support the Conservative Party on the 30th of September 1989?
No, I was not consulted as the exact timing. We certainly had talks over a period. My son James and Mrs. Brooks and no doubt others, that we felt this government was making a lot of mistakes, and that we'd had a long period of Labour rule, and it was time for a change.
And you, along with many others, were working out that Mr. Brown was likely to lose the next election.
No, I didn't know.
Well, Mr. Murdoch, one can't know, because unless one can read the future, there are uncertainties. But
I thought you were asking me to.
But your best guess, Mr. Murdoch, along with the others, best informed guess, was that Mr. Brown was going to lose, wasn't it?
The election was a long way away. I had no idea. You know, as many people have said, a week is a long time in politics.
And that was Mr. Howard Wilson, I think, originally said that. Now, I just deal with one piece of evidence, the inquiry received from Mr. Mackenzie. Mr. Mackenzie told us that Mr. Brown spoke to you on the phone. This was on or shortly after the 30th of September 2009. And he, Mr. Brown, is said to have roared at you for 20 minutes. Is that true or not?
I'm afraid that I'm very happy to tell you about the conversation that Mr. Mackenzie, whom I might have talked to about it over dinner, I occasionally see him, there was a very colourful exaggeration. Mr. Brown did call me and said, Rupert, do you know what's going on here? And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, the Sun and what it's doing and how it came out. So, and I said, I'm not aware of the I was not warned of the exact timing. I'm not aware of what they're saying. I'm a long, long way away. But I'm sorry to tell you, Gordon, we have come to the conclusion that we will support a change of government when and if there's an election. Not if, but when there's an election. And he said, and I must stress, no voices were raised. We were talking more quietly than you and I are now. He said, well, your company has declared war on my government, and we have no alternative but to make war on your company. And I said, I'm sorry about that, Gordon. Thank you for calling. End of subject.
How could Mr. Brown have declared war on your company?
I don't know. I don't think he was in a very balanced state of mind. He, frankly, he could have, I don't know, set up more commissions. God knows there's plenty of quongos and commissions around us now. That was it. He later, when the hacker scandal broke, made a totally outrageous statement, which he had to know was wrong. And he called us a criminal organization. And because he said that we had hacked into his personal medical records when he knew very well how the Sun had found out about his son, the condition of his son, which was very sad. A father from the hospital in a similar position called us, told us and said, shouldn't we get some charity or research on this and so on? And Mrs. Brooks immediately snatched it from the news list and said, let me handle this. And she called Mrs. Brown and said, look, this is going to be out. We should be careful. You know, how would you like it handled?
Regarding the acquisition of the remaining shares in B Sky B?
Oh, well, there's certainly been a desire there for a long time. I remember when Mr. Carey returned to the company after many years away, the first thing he said to me was, we should clean up the situation at Sky, or B Sky B. It was we started this company, and it was a long-standing ambition. With hindsight, I regret that I ever agreed to an IPO, although I admit that there were different times and there were probably monetary pressures which encouraged it.
I just wonder though, Mr. Murdoch, whether it entered into your thinking that Mr. Brown had said, we're going to declare war on your company, that you interpreted that as being, at the very least, the possibility of obstacles being placed in the way of your bid for the remaining shares in B Sky B.
No, that never occurred to me.
Didn't it?
No.
So would that be
Yes, certainly.
may I say
certainly not.
No.
I say what I had in mind for the rest of...
Yes. Now, I think Mr. Jay was just suggesting we should break, nothing more.
Al, I hope we can get through today.
Well, Mr. Murdoch, I'm concerned about the length
It's up to you.
Well, I'm concerned overall about the length of this evidence, and if we plough through the afternoon, how cogent my questions will be and your answers might be. I know how much I've got left. My preference would be to go just for about 45 minutes in the afternoon and then complete in about 2 or 3 hours in the morning.
Can I suggest that during the course of the next hour you have a word with those who are advising Mr. Murdoch, and he can have a word with them as well. I'm conscious that I do not want to put excessive pressure on you, and I don't want to put excessive pressure on Mr. Murdoch.
Thank you, sir.
All right, well, you can return to that at 2. Thank you very much. 2 o'clock. Yes, Mr. Jay.
Now, Mr. Murdoch, may we move to Mr. David Cameron? When asked in 2006 what you thought of him, you are reported as having said not much. Is that correct?
I don't remember that. I certainly could give you my recollection of him. I first met him once, maybe even twice, at family picnics at at weekends at my daughter's house in the grounds of Blenheim Castle, where he came with his family, and we were overrun by children. There were no politics, but I was extremely impressed at the kindness and feeling he showed to his children, and particularly to his retarded son. I mean, I came away talking about that's what a good family man.
Did you feel that he was lightweight?
No, not then, certainly not. He hasn't had, I think it's too early to make that judgment.
Now, when he was leader of the opposition, we know from one of the documents you've put in that you saw him on a number of occasions. It's our exhibit KRM 29, and that will be turned up for you. It might be tab 28 in that bundle. And it's page 01907.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We can see, Mr. Murdoch, that there are a number of meetings with him. In 2006 there were 2, a lunch and a breakfast. You're discussing politics. 2006,
yes.
Politics and policy. In 2007, it's less clear whether that breakfast took place. In 2008,
It's unclear that I don't have a memory, but yes. Go ahead.
It's just the general flavour of it. The exact dates probably don't matter for this purpose. In 2008, the breakfast. Rebecca Brooks is quite often there, isn't she? Or sometimes.
Once, I think it is stated.
And then you attended, and he attended the wedding of Rebecca Brooks to Charlie Brooks. We can see that.
Yes, together with
Mr. Brown and Mr. Blair and Mr. Cameron, they were all there.
And then if you turn over the page to 01908, there was a breakfast meeting with Mr. Cameron on the day the Sun endorsed him. Do you see that? 30th September?
Was that the day we endorsed him? Yes.
Yes.
No, that's not possible. The day we declared for the Tories, I believe, was at the time of the Labour Party conference or the end of it, and I was certainly in America.
Well, I've been working on the basis of the last 2 days with your son and with you that the right date was the 30th of September 2009. Are you saying that's incorrect?
I think so.
We
if that was the date of the Labour Party conference, it's certainly wrong.
I'm as sure as I can be, Mr. Murdoch, that it was the 30th of September 2009 that the Sun came out. And
Well, for the sake of argument, I'll accept you. Oh, yes, so we came out.
Well, we'll sort it out eventually anyway.
I wasn't here the day we came out. For the Tories.
You're sure about that in your mind, are you?
Oh, yes.
Now, when you referred to policy here, Mr. Murdoch, did you discuss with Mr. Cameron issues such as broadcasting regulation?
No. Mr. Jay, you keep inferring that endorsements were motivated by business motives. And if that had been the case, we would have endorsed the Tory party in every election. It was always more pro-business. I could have been like the Telegraph. I could even have texted them every day. But I didn't. I was interested in issues.
But this goes,
as it says here, we probably discussed Afghanistan.
if Mr. Murdoch, part of your thinking involves an assessment of who's going to win the next election, of course you wouldn't always be voting for the same, or wouldn't always be supporting the same party, would you?
If that had been the case, no, but I've explained that was not the case.
Do you remember discussing with Mr. Cameron the issue of BBC licence fees?
No, not at all.
Did you discuss with him the role of Ofcom?
No.
Did you discuss Mr. Coulson in the context of his becoming Director of Communications for the Conservative Party and then the coalition government?
No, I was just as surprised as anybody else.
Were you not interested to know what Mr. Cameron's position was on the various matters I've just put to you?
No. Well, no, you mentioned Ofcom.
BBC licence fees and broadcast regulation.
No, I wasn't interested in the BBC licence fee. I'd been through that with previous Prime Ministers, and it didn't matter what they said. They all hated the BBC, and they all gave it whatever they wanted.
Okay. Well, did you just assume with Mr. Cameron?
I did think that the idea of slicing it and giving it to commercial competitors, I'd never heard of that before, and it sounds strangely crazy. I don't believe they had that policy.
Mr. Murdoch, I'd like to ask you to separate out in your mind the question whether you might be discussing some topic or issue for commercial advantage. You've told Mr. Jay that you never did. With the separate question whether in fact these were topics that were worthy of discussion and on which you had a view. So, for example, you've mentioned that you talked about Afghanistan, and it would be perfectly reasonable for you to have a view on that. Lots of people will. And your view may be informed by your worldwide contacts through the businesses that you operate. That's merely your view. But therefore, your view on, for example, the regulation of television would itself be of value and maybe of interest to those who are formulating policy, not because it necessarily will affect News Corp, but because this is a business to which you have devoted your life, and therefore not surprising you'll have strong views. And I'm just slightly surprised.
I understand.
If nobody did ask your view.
I understand, sir. I just wish to say that I'd long since become disillusioned, and that there was a waste of time to talk to politicians about the BBC. That was about all there was to it. And Ofcom, no, I did not speak to him about that. They would have been asking for something probably, and I didn't do that.
Well, may you have been...
just repeat that, if I may. That
Of course.
if I'd been interested in commercial interests, I would have supported the Tory party in every election, because they were always more pro-business. But
And less in
maybe
favour
against
of regulation.
my better interest, but I don't think so. I think it was the interest, as Justice Leveson pointed out, that it was also my interest to reflect the views, or to talk to our readers and maybe attract more readers. And Afghanistan, I felt very strongly about. First, I thought it was right. I just forget what this was. I think beyond us going in there. I felt very strongly, particularly when I came here and saw the photographs of the great young British soldiers who'd either been wounded or killed there, coming back. I felt very strongly when the charge was made that they weren't being properly protected. And I was dissatisfied with Mr. Cameron's answer that they were better protected than any other Europeans. Our argument was that they should be as well protected as the Americans. And although we kept the relationship always with Mr. Cameron, I'm sorry, Mr. Brown, you'll note in the letters between he and I, we always finished with best wishes to our families.
Yes. In terms then of how your bid for the remaining shares in B Sky B would be treated, you would work from the not unreasonable default position that a Conservative government would be more favourable to the bid than a Labour government.
No,
Is that
I didn't think it was the business of government. It happens every day when controlling shareholders decide to take in the outstanding shares.
Well, I understand.
I didn't think there was any legal thing at all. The only thing that was worrying me, I was sitting in America, that what was worrying me was that the independent directors were driving up the price to something unrealistic. Many, many billions of dollars. I think close to 13 billion. They didn't even settle for that, I think. There was nothing ever settled. And that's a lot of money to bring into this country. It's also a lot of money to find.
Well, you said, Mr. Murdoch, that you didn't believe it was the legitimate interest of government. But surely your experience over the years would tell you that governments, for political reasons, would be interested in bids of this sort, particularly if you're involved in them, and how those bids should be treated. Would you agree with that?
No, because it didn't change anything. Ofcom had ruled that we were in charge, that we controlled the company. And we weren't saying we were getting rid of control. We were just going to continue with it. We did hope to make it stronger, make it a greater force in Europe, put it together with Sky Deutschland and Sky Italia, where we were having plenty of political difficulties. But that's another story.
Yes. But the whole experience of what happened on the 27th of January 1981, this is a heated debate in Parliament over your acquisition of the Times and the Sunday Times. What happened with Today in 1987? What happened with the B-Sky B merger in 1990? So there was always a political frisson around your bids, mergers and acquisitions, and therefore in relation to B-Sky B it was wholly predictable, wasn't it? There would be.
I welcome that question, Mr. J,
Yeah.
because I want to put it to bed once and for all that that is a complete myth.
So what's the myth, Mr. Murdoch?
That I used the influence of the Sun or the supposed political power to get favourable treatment.
But the reason why we have what I've called the political frisson at the very lowest is there's a perception about that you do use your influence impermissibly. Now, even if you wholly repudiate the factual basis for that, that is what we see constantly, 1981, 87, 1990, and again in 2010. Don't you agree that that's a recurring theme?
Well, in The Guardian, and maybe The Independent, but not everywhere. And, you know, after a while, if these lies are repeated again and again, they sort of catch on. And particularly if we're successful, it's sort of, you know, the people who are resentful can grab onto them, but they just aren't true.
Okay. And we don't have in this list we've been looking at Mr. Cameron flying out to Santorini and your yacht on the 26th of August 2008, which you tell us in your witness statement your wife remembers, but not you. Do you have any? You have no recollection at all of that, do you?
No, it's coming back to me vaguely. Actually, I checked it with my daughter because he was being flown, I believe, by my son-in-law's plane on his way to holiday in Turkey, and he did stop in Santorini, and she says that I in fact met him on her boat. But it doesn't matter, there were a couple of boats together.
So here's Mr. Cameron taking quite significant steps to meet you, detour from his private holiday to Turkey. What's your reaction to that sort of scenario? Do you think that that's wholly normal, or what's your view on it? And why do you say that?
I think I've explained that politicians go out of their way to impress people in the press, and I don't remember discussing any heavy political things with him at all. There may have been some issues discussed passingly. It was not a long meeting. As I say, I don't really remember the meeting, but I think that's part of the democratic process. All politicians of all sides like to have their views known by the editors of newspapers or publishers, hoping that they will be put across, hoping that they will be that they will succeed in impressing people. That's the game.
Yes, but doesn't the game go somewhat further than that? That it's not just providing the politician with a large megaphone. It is also powerful institutions like the Sun endorsing the politician, and therefore, so the argument might run, the votes of British people might be affected. Do you see that?
Of course, I think they certainly would like us to carry their views in a favourable way. And I think that's totally normal, and that goes for both parties or all parties. And you know, we're very lucky in this country that we have 10 vibrant national newspapers to keep the national debate going. I mean, I don't. Mr. Cameron might have thought stopping at Santorini would impress me. I don't know.
But perhaps
he certainly didn't.
But perhaps he, like you, Mr. Murdoch, understands.
I don't have any fealty to the Tory party or to the Labour Party. Like Mr. Barclay, I don't get invited to dinner at Downing Street.
But it's the importance of the face-to-face meeting, isn't it, Mr. Murdoch? Importance which you appreciated when you invited yourself to Chequers on the 4th of January 1981. He was seeking that access to you, wasn't he?
Let me be quite honest, Jay. I enjoy meeting. Let's call them our leaders. Some impress me more than others. And I meet them around the world. And I could tell you one or two who particularly impressed me.
I mean, you mentioned the importance.
One looks at their personalities, their knowledge, their policies, their principles, or one hopes of their principles.
Can I bring you back to the issue of the democratic process? Do you feel that there's any validity, at least in the perception, that there is an implied trade-off here? People think, and have been thinking over 30 years, that the support you give to politicians, through the endorsements in The Sun in particular, is met with a quid pro quo after they attain power.
No,
and if that's right, but just wait to the end of this, Mr. Murdoch.
Sorry,
if that is right, then the democratic process is distorted. I'm not really interested, because we understand your evidence that there's no empirical basis to this, you say, but do you see at least the perception of that?
No, the perception certainly irritates me, because I think it's a myth. And everything I do every day, I think, proves it to be such. Have a look at, well, it's not relevant, but how I treat Mayor Bloomberg in New York. Sends him crazy. But we support him every time he runs for re-election.
Shortly after the coalition government was set up, you went for tea at number 10 on the 18th of May 2010.
Yes.
Now on that occasion, and possibly other occasions, you go in through the back door, is that right?
That occasion. Yes. There are reasons for that. They always seem to don't want me to be photographed going out the front door, or I don't want to be, but it also happens to be a shortcut to my apartment, so it's quite okay.
Right. And why do you think no?
And the car park is usually parked behind there. There's a car park behind 10 and 11 Downing Street.
Well, you deal with this fairly short encounter over tea at paragraph 110 of your witness statement, don't you, Mr. Murdoch?
Do you want it here?
Or just
I can tell you everything from memory there.
Page 03015.
Oh. Now you've really caught me.
Paragraph 110, 03015.
Yes?
You say most of the way through that paragraph,
Which one?
110.
I'm sorry. Yes.
You say you do
This is
recall.
about Mrs. Thatcher.
Yes, that's at the top. But if you go halfway down, the sentence beginning, I do recall that. Do you see that, Mr. Murdoch? Shortly after his election, Mr. Cameron invited me to tea at number 10. He thanked me for the support of our papers. Well, I'm sure he did that. I congratulated him and told him that I was sure our titles would watch carefully and report whether he kept all of his campaign promises. Was that the extent of it, Mr. Murdoch?
Yes. I could add that Mr. Coulson was present.
And at that stage, of course, the B-Sky bid was about to be announced. It was announced in June 2010. May I ask you this, was there no link in your mind between your support for Mr. Cameron and the B-Sky bid?
None at all.
Were you not fearful that if your guess was wrong and that Mr. Brown had won that election, that the B-Sky bid would hit choppier waters?
No, I never gave it any thought. It was a legal bid. It was a commonplace sort of bid. And I didn't see any problem.
Were not your advisors in the United Kingdom briefing you constantly as to what was happening here politically, what was likely to happen in the election, all in the context of how the bid would be confronted in June 2010?
No. The two things were not linked at all.
But I think the first thing is correct there, Mr. Murdoch. You do have advisors here in the United Kingdom briefing you on the current political situation, don't you?
Well, editors and people I speak to and gossip with. There was no sort of formal advice, but yes.
The way it works, a corporation with worldwide interests, the chairman can't possibly have his metaphorical fingers in every pie. You have advisors scattered around the world who are capable of feeding you relevant information about the political situation, the economic situation, everything which might be relevant to your company. That's right.
You talk about them as advisors. I would call them senior executives, but yes.
Why was the bid announced 1 month after the election?
I don't know. I'd have to go and look at my records. I know that Mr. Kerr, at their sort of away weekend of directors, which takes place in I think sometime around June, Mr. Carey had raised the question with the outside directors that we would like to find a way to move forward on this, but there wasn't, I don't think there was ever a formal bid as such.
No. But what interests me, Mr. Murdoch, it's a multi-billion pound acquisition. It needs very careful planning. You need to get all your finances in place. probably takes years to conceive in one sense, and then serious consideration is given internally to this bid in 2009. Surely, in strategic terms, you're also being advised as to when best to announce the bid. Isn't that right?
I didn't think we gave any thought to the timing of it, except that it could be good to talk to all the directors when they were together.
Mm. So it follows then, it's pure coincidence, it's a month after the general election, is that right?
Yes.
I'll deal with one more topic, and then we might break, see how we get on, and that's Mr. Alex Salmond. Can we just deal with some history? I can do this very shortly. The Scottish Sun was pro-SNP in 1992, but it was anti-SNP in 2007. The headline was, "Vote SNP today, and you put Scotland's head in the noose." Do you remember that?
No. I do know that in 2007 that they did support the Labour Party.
You did support the
Am
Labour
I right
Party.
about that?
Yes, you are.
Yes. And then in 2010, the next election, was it?
Yes.
When we supported Mr. Salmond and his party.
After the 2007 election, your relationship with Mr. Salmond, one might suggest, improved. If you look at your exhibit KRM 28, which is going to be tab 27.
Yes.
Can you see, Mr. Murdoch, that between the 17th of November 2000 and the 12th of October 2007, there was no contact between you and Mr. Salmond?
On the 17th of November 2000.
And the 12th of October.
There was a telephone call.
Yes.
Possibly.
Yes.
And the same is said for the 12th of October 2007. So they're 7 years apart for two, perhaps, telephone calls.
Yes. I think the point was more, well, absolutely no contact between you and Mr. Salmond. But from certainly the 30th of October 2007, there is, I won't say frequent contact, but there's far more contact, isn't there? And we can see, this is page 01904.
Well, you can see here that in the 30th of October, we opened a large and very modern printing plant in Scotland. And Mr. Salmond, along with many other notables, were invited to be present.
Mm-hmm. But then there's a breakfast meeting on the 4th of April 2008, which must have been either one-to-one or certainly more intimate, where you discussed your family's Scottish roots. Do you see that?
I forget that, but it's possible. It doesn't say where that was held.
No.
He might have been visiting New York or something.
Well, the location isn't given.
Breakfast meetings tend to take place much more in New York than here.
Then there are a series of telephone calls. On the 20th of June 2011, you discussed Mr. Salmond's interest in Scottish independence. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then there's another meeting, December 2011. This time you discussed News Corps' investments in Scotland. Do you see that?
I don't know who wrote this, but
Well, it's
It wasn't
reconstructed.
to ask for anything. It might have been to apologise because we reduced Sky's employment numbers quite dramatically in Scotland. We decided to break up our call centre from many, many thousands of people into 3 different ones around the United Kingdom, just for security reasons.
Having, in your eyes, perhaps unexpectedly...
But we are, you know, we still remain a very large employer in Scotland through that and through the Scottish Sun.
Yes.
And, of course, there'd be lesser activities like distribution of films and books and so on.
How would you describe your relationship with Mr. Salmond? Is it warm or is it something different?
Today,
Yes.
I would describe it as warm.
And over this period, is the general impression we might derive that your relationship is continuing to improve throughout? That's the period 2007 to the present day.
Yes. I mean, I don't know Mr. Salmond well, but I have 3 meetings here, and he's an amusing guy, and I enjoy his company and enjoy talking with him or listening to him.
May I invite you please to look at some correspondence that Mr. Salmond's office has released. It's in my tab 93 of the second file. The first page says Alex Salmond releases Rupert Murdoch papers. Unfortunately, this isn't paginated. But on the 24th of October 2007, which is a number of pages through this, Mr. Murdoch, Mr. Salmond writes to you in New York. May I ask you to see if you could find that, please?
Here's the BBC News.
Yes, so the BBC News are announcing that Mr. Salmond's office has released the papers which we're about to look at. I wonder if you might be given some assistance on this to find this letter of the 24th of October 2007. It's about 6 pages into this bundle.
Yes. So is this the
Mr. Salmond...
October 2007?
That's right. That he met with
24th, I think it says.
you... Yes. He met you in New York in early 2007. We can see that, can't we?
Yes.
And he found your views both insightful and stimulating, and there was a reference to a book which by Mr. Webb, which you gave him to read, and then he's telling you about Global Scott. And then on the 31st of October 2007, which is the next
This was a
page.
book by, well, he's now temporarily Senator Webb, who wrote some years ago talking about the Irish Scots and their persecution. It was very fascinating, and how they had gone. They were great fighters, but how they went and settled in Virginia and Tennessee and so on. But if you go through the names of casualties, you see a disproportionate number of them there.
Okay. He writes to you again on the 31st of October, which is the next page, inviting you to go to see a play called Black Watch in New York, but warning you that it's quite challenging, a rough, tough production. Did you go and see that play?
I'm afraid not.
And then there are other letters which pass between you. I'm not going to look at all of them. I'm just going to pass over them. Mr. Salmon to you in February 2009. Then in 2000.
Sorry, excuse me, I'm not with you.
It doesn't really matter, Mr. Murdoch. I'm just passing over it.
Okay.
And then the Scottish Sun supports the SNP in the Scottish election of 2011, I think it is, although the Scottish Sun is neutral on the issue of independence. Do you follow me?
I don't see that in this letter.
No, you don't, because I'm moving on. It's a fat matter of public record that the Scottish Sun supported the SNP in the Scottish election, although it was neutral on independence. Was that a decision you contributed to?
I don't remember, but probably yes.
And why did you support Mr. Salmon's party? Can you recall?
Well, it's a little emotional, but I am attracted by the idea. But I'm not convinced, and so I said we should stay neutral on the big issue. But let's see how he performs.
Well, of course, your emotions are taking you to a different place previously. As we've seen in 2007, you didn't support the SNP. Indeed, there was the head in the noose headline, wasn't there? Which I mentioned about 10 minutes ago.
I didn't write that.
But you wouldn't have been responsible for the detail of the headline, but would you have been responsible for the general tenor of the political endorsement in 2007?
I think we decided to support Labour, yes, throughout.
But the emotional attraction to the SNP was not manifested by you in any way in your choice of endorsement in 2007, was it?
No, I don't know much about the SNP. I just have met Mr. Salmon a few times and find him an attractive person. And as I say, I said to you, it's a nice idea.
There's only one further point arising out of this, and I don't think it's necessary to turn up the letter, Mr. Murdoch. But Mr. Dinsmore, the General Manager of News International Newspapers Scotland, wrote to Mr. Salmond on the 9th of May 2011, congratulating him on last Friday's quite astonishing victory. Points out that the result was born out of a desire to change and the reinvigoration of Scotland. And he says, I look forward to News International playing its part in helping to make the country a place where outward-looking, forward-thinking and risk-taking are the norm. So,
What letter is that? Oh,
9th of May 2011. So you...
Yes.
Might be said that
Short letter.
you had an ally in Mr. Salmond now, and you're pointing out what News International, or rather Mr. Dinsmore was pointing out, what News International hope to achieve in Scotland in the future. Would you agree with that?
Well, Mr. Dinsmore may have gone a little too far, but in his enthusiasm, I can only tell you, as a matter of interest, that if we didn't continue to support Mr. Salmon at this stage, I really would have an insurrection up there.
Now, Mr. Murdoch, I'm certainly beginning to flag whether you are or not. I don't think matters. I think it's probably right, because I'm going to move on to a...
Mr. Murdoch, this is my decision. I think we've probably had enough today. I'm sorry to have to inconvenience you tomorrow as well, but
that's quite all right,
I think it's more important that we take this in a measured way without getting too tired. So thank you very much indeed. 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Thank you, sir, for your consideration.